people may want to know. And the other alternative, next slide, is a full disclosure model. Whenever you hear next slide, please just put the next slide on, please. Uh-oh, this has gone from sharing to, can you get it back? Yeah, right. So the full disclosure model uh, is that when your model is that you tell the bad news to the patient all the time. This is your policy. Whoever comes to you, you practice full disclosure model. And you may have a reason for doing that because you may feel that it's the patient's right to know, so I should tell the bad news to the patients, all of them. Uh, However, this model can go into a conflict, next slide please, with a patient who does not want to know. For a patient who does not want to know, the patient has the right not to know. And the patient may have many reasons for not wanting to know. The patient may not be mentally prepared to know, or just doesn't want to have the burden of information. So we have two models, non-disclosure model and full disclosure model. And both models have a problem because it may run into conflict with the patient's right to know and the patient's right not to know. Next slide. So what can be done? We have to take into account the individual patient's requirement. So we have to make an individualized disclosure model in which we have to find out whether the patient wants to know or not. And if the patient wants to know, then we have to find out how much the patient wants to know and only give that much, not less, not more, only as much as the patient wants to know. So there are two challenges in front of us. How do we find out whether the person sitting in front of you wants to know or not? And if the patient wants to know, how much? Next slide, please. Can you go back? I think there's a lot of lag between the changing of slides. Okay, fine. So before we get into how to do all of that, I just want to focus on some of the background information which is necessary. Next slide. And one of the most important background necessary for each one of us is to understand why we should communicate bad news. It is not an easy thing to do, so it should be clear to us why it is important. So first important point is closure of life's business. That means if we know that we don't have much time in front of us, we really don't know how much time we actually have in front of us. But with when we have a diagnosis of an incurable, progressive, advanced medical condition, our mortality is kind of right staring at us in our face. And in that kind of condition, how much are we going to live, or our mortality changes from an abstract construct to something very realistic right in front of us. In that situation, if we knew that we are uh, terminally ill, our mortality is staring at us, and if we know it when we are reasonably in physical and mental health, then we will have time to think of what all we need to do before we die. It could be uh, arranging the distribution of property, which we call will. It could be giving instructions to the family members and your loved ones what to do, when to do once I am gone. It could be just telling your loved ones I love you. It could be about indulging in things that you always wanted to or you have always liked. For example, if you're a diabetic and you wanted to have a laddu, yeah, go ahead, have a laddu. I mean, it can't kill you worse than your disease can. It also involves some spiritual aspect. For example, taking the burden off your shoulder. If you have wronged somebody, to ask forgiveness. If somebody has wronged you, to forgive them and to build up a wounded relationship. It could be getting in touch with your maker, if if at all you believe in that. So there are a lot of things to do before we die. You get a chance to do it. That is why communicating bad news is important. The second important point is hospital hopping and doctor shopping. Most of the time, we see the patient and the family is going from one hospital to the other hospital, looking for cure that does not exist. And as a result, the family member have to sell off everything that they own. First, the cow goes, the jewelry goes, and then everything, the house goes, and the family is literally on the road, and the patient finally dies. And then the whole generation is ruined because of this. And hence, it is important that if the patient and the family knew, and when I say family, sometimes the immediate family may not know, some of the relatives who are in charge may know, sometimes the patient does not know, the family knows. But whatever it is, when everybody concerned does not know, then this hospital hopping and doctor shopping continues. And what a waste of time, energy, and effort it is, when the patient could have been at home comfortable, assuming the patient is getting good palliative care. The patient could have been home comfortable till the end point. However, again, this is a reality that hospital hopping and doctor shopping happens, and this mostly happens because the bad news was never communicated. Next line, please. Next slide, please. Another important thing is barrier in relationship. When the patient is there and the patient does not know, the family members who know the bad news, they have to put up a pretense that everything is fine. And when the emotions overwhelm them, then they will go to the father's room and cry, or they may go to the neighbor's office and cry, or they may come to you and cry because they can't cry in front of the patient. And what about the patient? The patient's body tells the person that something is not right, things are not getting better. But the patient knows the family members and friends, relatives, doctors, and others are not telling the truth. Everybody is saying it's okay, nothing is good, everything is fine, you will get better. But the patient realizes that things are not getting better. And when relatives start pouring in from far and wide to just to have a look at the patient, and then they stand at the door of the patient's room with their hand on their chin, with a big sympathetic look on their face, most patients absolutely hate that. And the patient can hear the whispers going on in the other room and realize that they are talking about him or her, but they are not going to tell him or her what exactly is going on. And this can be very isolating. The patient is literally alone in the whole world, and the whole world is just there behind the transparent shield. It can be a very, very isolating experience. And needless to say, the relationship which should have been strengthened, especially when the precious amount of life is very limited, at that point of time, we end up playing a big drama in the household. What a waste of precious time that is. And once a patient is dead, and then you put a garland around the photo, and then you wish you had some time with more with the patient. Remember how much of precious time was wasted when the patient was still alive. And all of this could have been averted, prevented, if bad news was communicated. And hence, there may be more reasons, but I'm just putting up these 3 points: finishing life's business, preventing hospital hopping and doctor shopping, and and removing barriers in relationships are the positive outcomes of communicating bad news. Next slide, please. But many a times, what happens is the family comes and tells us, please do not tell it to the patient. Essentially, they are trying to enter into a conspiracy of silence with us. What they're saying is, whatever information you want to share, please share with us. Please do not tell it to the patient. And this is collusion. So the family tries to enter into collusion with us. And why do they do it? Next slide. They do it because they are trying to protect their loved ones. Next slide. And they are trying to protect their loved ones because they think that exposure to bad news is going to harm them, and it is their belief. And this causes a lot of anxiety and fear among the family members because they need our help, but they're also very scared of us. They're scared we may tell the bad news. So first thing for you to understand is, do not challenge their belief. In fact, next slide, agree to collude. Just tell them, okay, I will not tell the patient, right? And there are no tricks into it. You will reach the patient only with the consent of the family, otherwise not. Because in our country, the patient does not come to us, the family brings the patient to us. That means, unlike in the most of the developed western countries, patient autonomy is not sacred in our environment. The family's right over the patient is over and above the patient's right over himself or herself. So patient's autonomy is subservient to the family's right over the patient in our culture. And hence, initially it is important to agree with the request of the family. Next slide. And and then we have to earn the family's trust. We have to listen to the family. We have to build up a relationship with the family. And I'm sure you would have got to do it from our previous. Another important is to relieve the patient's pain and other suffering. Because once you make the patient comfortable, the family members will automatically start trusting you more. And hence, it's very important that you learn, or at least if you have people, doctors who know how to palliate physical symptoms, that's a great asset. Next slide. And once the family starts trusting you, then you can start reorienting the family into the primary three reasons why it is important to communicate bad news. And those are the things that we just talked about. And it's possible that initially, if when your communication skills are developing, you may encounter more failures, but over a period of time, you will see that the your conversion rate starts improving. And but be prepared for failures. Next slide. Be prepared for failures because it's possible that some families may not agree with your suggestions. And do not force your uh, ideas onto the family, because do not make this your agenda that you have to convert the family's thinking. Some families are like that. And if the family does not permit you, then you just can't communicate bad news to the patient, but you will try to help the patient in other possible ways. I agree, it is kind of like fighting with the one hand tied behind your back, but that is the reality. That is the reality of our society, the way the way we have to work in our. This is the reality. So we have to find ways of working within our reality. Next slide. So coming back to communication, and this is where we get into how to do it. So all over the world, we follow this protocol called the Spikes protocol. This is the standard operating procedure of communicating bad news. And initially, we set up the interview, and then we find out what is the patient's perception. Setting up the interview means that you find a time, place for this. For example, in my practice, I usually communicate bad news in the evening part of the day because by that time the hospital is quieter and I would have usually finished seeing the patients in the OP and in the IP. And in my room, I always make sure that there is some paper cups and some drinking water available and some tissue because there may be some crying involved. So just in case it is these things are required, it will be available within reach. And assessing patients' perception is basically finding out their insight, and then we try to get an invitation uh, from the patient to communicate bad news. Then we share the information, that is the knowledge, truthfully. And then once that happens, of course, be prepared for emotions to come, and we address that emotions. And thereafter, we subsequently we talk about what is possible, what is not possible, and how do we plan about it. So this is in short the spikes protocol. Next slide, please. So I'll just give a small history. This is a fictional character, Mr. Bharat, who is 60 years old gentleman, and he had an abdominal discomfort and weight loss of about 2 months duration. The local general practitioner treated him for about a week's time. There was no relief. So he referred him to the gastroenterologist at the city hospital. And there a CT abdomen was done, which showed a mass lesion in the stomach. And then endoscopy uh, by biopsy was done, which showed that the mass was a cancer of the stomach. A surgery was done to explore what could be done, but when they opened up, they found the whole abdomen was studded with metastasis. The disease had spread beyond any treatment, and then the surgeon was forced to close it without doing anything much. Subsequently, the patient was referred to you for symptomatic and supportive care. And right now, imagine the patient is sitting in front of you. So this is the medical history, which you will get usually from the reference letter or a consultation from the referring department. Next slide, please. And then when you have to talk to the patient, and you will get a patient's history. That is the history that the patient will tell. The patient may say, I've been having gas problems since 2 months. So I went to the nearby doctor. He gave me some gas tablets. For about a week, I took them, but there was no relief. Then he took an X-ray of my stomach, and then he gave me a letter to see the gastro doctor. So there, the gastro doctor saw me and he asked me to get a scan done. And after the scan, he did a tube test. They put a tube down my mouth, and then after that, they found some problem, and then he told me to meet the surgeon because surgery was needed. So subsequently, surgery was done, and after that, they gave me this letter to come and see you. So this is the second story. The first story is the medical story. This is the patient story, and then there's going to be a third story. Next slide, which is what the patient understands about him or her, and this we have to dig out in our discussion. Now, this is what I was talking about when we talked about last time. To find the insight, we have to ask. And while you ask, you get more information. For example, when the patient is saying, I have been having gas since 2 months, I went to the nearby doctor, he gave me gas tablets for about a week. There was no relief. He took an X-ray of my stomach. I would ask, so what did the X-ray show? And the patient may reply, I don't know the result, but he gave me a letter to see the gastro doctor to go and see, and the gastro doctor in the city hospital. So why did he send you to the gastro doctor? So the patient may reply, for better treatment, I guess. Okay, go on. And the gastro doctor did a scan. So what was the result of the scan? I don't know the result of the scan, right? And then subsequently did a tube test. So what was the tube test about? I don't know. They said something in English, but I did not understand it properly. I don't know what the result was. Then what happened? Then they asked me to get the surgery done. Okay. Then what happened? Then the patient may say, after surgery, my gas problem is gone, but I'm feeling more and more tired each day. Okay. Then He gave me a letter to come and see you. So I may ask, did they tell you why they are sending you to me? So the patient may say, I for better treatment, I guess. So what these things in red tells you is what the patient thinks is going on. Some of the things may be right, some of the things may not be right, and there are a lot of places where the patient has no idea. Patient says, I don't know. So this third history gives you the insight. And now you know which are the blank spots which you need to fill. And basically, if this patient wants to know, all that you need to do is fill in the blanks for the person to communicate bad news, right? Next slide, please. So before you get on with the business of uh, communicating bad news, there is some pre-procedure preparation. You update yourself on all the information that you want. You dedicate a time for this procedure, because just like any surgery, this communicating bad news is like a planned surgery. You need to dedicate a time for it and set the environment. I just told you how I set my environment. I choose a time, a place, etc. But sometimes you may have to do it at some other place. But make sure that you try to keep the environment for communicating bad news as conducive as possible, preferably a quieter time of the day, preferably a quiet place in your OP or IP, someplace, right? And then put into practice all the listening skills that we talked about last time. Next slide, please. So first thing is explore if the patient wants to know. So Mr. Bharat, you told me you continue to feel tired. Do you wonder why? Do you want to know more about your disease? Next slide. So the patient may say, yes, I do want to know what is going on. Sometimes you don't have to explore. The patient may by themselves seek out what is wrong with me. Can you tell me what is wrong with me? If the patient is not saying that, you can explore and probably you will get a response like that. Next slide. Once the patient says, yes, what is wrong with me? Do not proceed with telling the bad news. First, give a warning shot. Mr. Bharat, if it is something serious, would you still want to know? Now, this is a very, very important part, because when you give a warning shot, it gives them a chance to think about it. And if they are not mentally prepared for it, they may go back. For example, next slide. So this person is not making eye contact. He says, can you give me my medicines? I have to go now. Or the person may say, tell it to my children. Or the person may say, I don't want to know. So if you see one of these or all of these or something like that, then remember this patient does not want to know. Next slide. Instead of that, if you have a patient who looks you into your eyes and says, yes, I do want to know, then there is no confusion. The patient wants to know. So that is the advantage of giving a warning shot, that you can differentiate between a person who wants to know and the person who does not want to know. Do not tell the person who does not want to know. Only proceed with patients who want to know. Next slide. So how are you going to proceed? You tell them a story. You tell the story of the patient to the patient from the beginning. And while you are telling the story, you fill in the blanks and escalate information as you go along. And while you are doing it, keep eye on the patient's body language. If there is eye contact, continue the story. If the eye contact stops, pause the story. Because at this point of time, when the patient has received some new information, the patient may need some time to digest the new information, and then the patient may look you up. However, if the patient is continuously not making an eye contact and you don't know whether the patient had enough or the patient is stuck in some thoughts, you can always ask the person, should I proceed? Do you want to know more? Or something like that. If the patient looks up and makes eye contact, you can proceed. However, if the patient does not make eye contact, that means perhaps the patient had enough, right? So we have to stop where the patient wants us to stop. That is how we'll find out whether we're giving adequate information or less information or more information. Next slide, please. So we will do a small role play here. So Mr. Bharat, you have been suffering from gas since 2 months. Your local doctor gave gas medicines, no relief, and they did an X-ray. Next slide. So the X-ray showed something like a shadow. And to know more about this shadow, he referred you to the city hospital. Now, I want you to focus that we first mentioned something like a shadow, and in the next sentence, we escalated something like a shadow to shadow. So that is how we gradually escalate information. Initially, it was something like a shadow. Now it is shadow. Next slide. So the patient makes eye contact and says, "Oh, I didn't know that." Next slide. In the city hospital, the scan showed something like a tumor. And to know what this tumor was, they did the tube test. This tube test is called endoscopy, by the way. So again, you can see there is an escalation. Something like a tumor becomes a tumor. So something like a shadow becomes a shadow, and a shadow becomes something like a tumor, and something like a tumor becomes a tumor. Next slide. So here the patient is making eye contact but not saying anything. So you can continue the story. Next slide. The tube test was done to see if your tumor was something like a cancer. Next slide. Do you mean to say that I have cancer? Eye contact is still there. Next slide. I am sorry. Yes. Next slide. No eye contact. Next slide. You pause. Next slide. Still no eye contact. Now you don't know what to do. So you interject. Mr. Bharat, do you want to know more? Next slide. They had operated and removed my cancer, didn't they, doctor? Next slide. I'm sorry. When they opened you up, they found the cancer had spread all over. They could not remove it. Next slide. They lied to me. So this is now an emotion coming out in the form of tears. Next slide. They lied to me. Now this is an emotion coming out as anger. Next slide. When patient starts ventilating emotion, either it may be tears or anger or just stunned silence, at this point of time, the most important thing to do is not to do anything. Just be with the patient. Don't say something, don't do that. If you are comfortable and you think it is appropriate, you can touch the patient lightly for a moment and take your hands off. Allow the patient to make eye contact again. If the patient is not making eye contact, then you can, after some time, you can ask, would you want would you want to talk more about it? So till they make eye contact, just sit there, don't do something, just be with the patient. Because this is essential to allow the emotions to be ventilated. Next slide. Once the emotion has been ventilated, then the patient may make eye contact and they may say something which can be a trick question. For example, how much time do I have, doctor? Next. And remember, I had told you never to assume, always ask. So you can say, why do you ask that? Next slide. My daughter's marriage is fixed after 6 months. Should I arrange it earlier? So here is a patient who is asking, how much time do I have? Because the patient wants to know and wants to plan. Next slide. Another scenario. The patient is saying, how much time do I have, doctor? Remember, same question. Next slide. Do not assume, ask. Why do you ask that? Next slide. Why did God do this to me? So here is a patient who did not ask how much time do I have to plan. Here is a patient who was ventilating the emotion when he asked that question, how much time do I have? And when you ask, if you get an answer to the question like this: what did I do wrong? Why did this happen to me? Remember, the patient just needed more ventilation. Next slide. Once the patients have ventilated emotion, and then once the fog has cleared, once the cognitive part of the brain comes up, then you can discuss what can be done, what cannot be done, and how do we plan it forward. And then we move forward. Remember, always give achievable hope, never give false hope. Next slide, please. So that kind of finishes our how to communicate bad news. In between, we talked about collusion. And coming to the third part of today's agenda, anger. Uh, Anger is a high energy consuming negative emotion. And remember, when I talk about anger, I'm talking about how you're going to deal anger in your day to day clinical life. However, if there is a big mob trying to attack you, then that is a law and order problem. Run away from that place, save your life. It's also applicable for situation where maybe one or two people are under the influence of alcohol or other substance abuse or abused substances, and they are not in a state of mind to have a reasonable rational talk, and hence there also it's a law and order problem, and what we are going to learn here does not apply for all other day-to-day clinical anger situation. This kind of applies. So basically, anger is a high energy consuming negative emotion. So it takes a lot of energy to get angry and to sustain anger. So if you knock out the energy, if you take away the energy, the anger will fall down very fast. So that is why it is important to understand it is a high energy consuming negative emotion. Next slide. So how do you knock out the anger? First of all, there are three things that you should do as far as your body language is concerned. Most of the time, when somebody is getting angry, you see that they are standing or pacing around. They are not sitting and getting angry. Because when there is high anger, there's a lot of adrenaline, and it becomes difficult, physically impossible to sit down with that much of adrenaline flowing inside. And hence, those who are angry are usually in a standing position. And make sure that if you are sitting, make sure you also stand up, because you want to make your body in the same position as the other body, so that you're removing hierarchy, and equality creates a pleasant experience, right? So this is one way of tackling anger. The second important thing that you have to do is when you're standing, you should bend a little forward, just your spine a little forward. That shows that you are not a threat to the other person. So if you stand in lordosis, you look like arrogant. And instead of that, if you stand a little bending forward, not like the Maharaja of Air India caricature, but just a little, and don't cross your hand in front of your chest. Put your hand down. And in this position, you are showing I am not a threat to you. I am respectful of you. And this will also help the anger to dissipate. And the third important thing to do is make eye contact. Because when you make eye contact, you are showing I am confident. I am not afraid of you. So, and it is very important to show this confidence, because then somebody who is getting angry will find these three combination of equality, respect, and confidence very difficult to maintain the anger. And this is just the body language of how you are going to stand. Once you have assumed this posture, don't say anything, just nod your head in agreement with whatever this person is saying. Just make eye contact, stand, and slight bend of your spine, and nod your head. Next slide. And once you do that, you realize that the person may be saying so many things, but the person cannot maintain the high energy with what you're doing. And slowly the person cools down. You don't have to say anything. And once the high flame of anger comes down to sim, to the small anger, to small flame, then you can tell this person, I want to know more about this. Can we sit down and talk? Never invite somebody to sit down when they are in severe anger, always bring the anger down by the technique I just talked to you about. And once the severe anger comes down, then invite the person to sit down to talk more about it. You would say, I want to know more about this. Can we talk about this? Can we just sit down and talk about this? At this point of time, you sit down and allow this person to ventilate more. Next slide. And as the person ventilates more and more, the anger slowly melts away. And if all during this conversation, if you found that there was actually a problem and there is a solution you can offer, do offer the solution. If there is no solution to be offered, then of course don't mention it. If during this conversation, if you realize that there was a real case to tender an apology, then by all means tender an apology. However, if there is no real genuine reason to be apologetic about, then do not give a fake apology. Do not give an apology just for the sake of apology, just for the sake of giving an apology, because it will very easily be seen as unnecessary or fake, and we don't want that kind of experience for the person. If there is no need for an apology, don't apologize. If there is an indication for apology, do apologize. Most of the time, my experience is that the person who got angry usually apologizes for being angry and causing inconvenience, and then usually we part our ways in a good way. So this is what how we have to deal with anger in our day-to-day clinical life. Again, I want to emphasize, we are not talking about law and order problem, which is a mob violence, group violence, or substance and alcohol abuse related violence. So I think next slide is just uh, take home messages. Yeah. So take home points. Focus on the family's distress when you are managing pollution. Make the family comfortable. When you are talking about communicating bad news, give a warning shot to find out who wants to know and who does not want to. Remember, when you're communicating bad news, you're only a facilitator of information. It cannot be your agenda to give the whole information. Just give as much as the patient wants to know, not less, not more. That means patients decide how much they want to know. Patients decide if they want to know. Patients decide how much they want to know. Next slide, please. I think this is the last slide. Ventilation of emotion is therapy. It is not a waste of time. So when you spend time with the patient when they are ventilating emotion, whether it is anger or whether it is sadness, it is, please remember, you are not wasting your time. Just by sitting there and not doing anything, you are not wasting time. You are providing therapy. And when people have bad uh, diagnosis or prognosis, always give realistic hope in the end, but never give false ones. And when you're dealing with anger, please remember, you should be smarter than taking the anger personally. The person may be very abusive, they may be using cuss words, but please remember, they are just revealing uh, emotional distress in the form of anger. They may have multiple reasons to be angry about. You may or may not be the cause of the anger, but don't get taken in by the anger. Don't get angry yourself. You are smarter than that. Using a non-confrontational, active ventilation of anger is an easy skill to master. I hope all of you would have found, you will find use of this technique. But please don't stand and nod in front of a angry mob. Run for your life. Okay, so I guess that's the end slide. Is there another slide? Next slide. Okay, so that's about it. So I think I finished it in 45 minutes. We have time for a case presentation and time for questions. If anybody wants to ask questions right now, do we have time for that?
Yes, sir, sure. For 5 minutes, we can have a discussion on this.
Right. So if you have any questions, thank you, Sindhu Ishwaran. If you have any questions on communicating bad news, on collusion or anger, please feel free to ask either by showing your hand so that Gayatri can unmute you and allow you to ask a question directly and discuss it directly by audio video. Otherwise, you can put up a question on the chat box and Gayatri will have a look at it. And are there any questions already in the chat box, Gayatri?
No, sir, not yet.
All right. So maybe we can just wait a minute to, yeah. Mohan Kumar has put up his hand. Can you, I think there's some other people also putting up their hand. Can you, Gayatri, allow
Yeah,
those who
sure,
have
sir,
put up
sure,
their
sir.
hand to ask their or make a comment? It's not
Satish,
necessary that you have to have a question. You can have a comment as well, or sharing an experience, anything.
Mohan Kumar, sir, you can speak. Sir, you can unmute yourself and speak, or else you can put a question in the chat box, Mohan Kumar, sir. Satish, sir?
Yes, uh, I would just simply applaud the presentation. It was very in a simple way, step by step, things have been placed before us. Uh, just like I am a non-medico, but I could very easily perceive what was conveyed. I must congratulate you for this nice presentation. I have no
Thank you, sir.
I have no comment.
Thank you so much, sir. That's very kind of you.
Thank you, sir. Then Preeta Sarkar has asked how to help a patient when the patient comes to know about his or her disease and feels depressed and does not speak at all or vent out any emotion.
It is a question of regular engagement with the patient, and it's not just one person. Communication, as I always say, is a team sport. The whole team should be well versed in communication, not just one person who communicates the bad news. The doctor, the nurses, the physiotherapists, the psychologist, clinical psychologists, and the social workers, anybody and everybody is part of the team has to engage with the patient and family so that the patient may feel comfortable to open up with one of the person. Maybe it's a family or a friend or one of the team members. So it is about uh, it's about engaging and also waiting for the person to open up. It's also about allowing the person to ventilate. They may ventilate in many ways. uh, it's not necessary that everybody cries and ventilate or everybody gets angry and ventilates. Some people just have a stunned silence, and the silence may be there for a day or two because there it is such a whole lot of information and very traumatic information that they have just received, and it takes some time for people to get over it. So it's just a matter of waiting and being supportive in every way possible, and eventually people come out of their shell. What was the other thing that you just talked about? There was some other thing in the chat which came in and
Yes,
disappeared.
sir. Can you please explain that in collusion? Do not make this your agenda.
Yes, because as I say, why are we trying to manage pollution? Because we want to have the patient on our side before we communicate bad news to the patient. Why it is important? Because in our country, the family has an overall right over the patient more than the patient has the right over himself or herself. And it is also important that it's also important for our safety that we have the family's permission to talk to the patient. However, despite our best effort, if the family refuses to allow us to communicate bad news to the patient, then do not push, do not push the effort. Just stop trying to convert the family, because you know that they are not. Otherwise, what happens is then a friction starts developing between you and the family. And when somebody is terminally ill, and that is the last thing you want, to develop a friction with the family. You want the family, because already it's a very, it's a dreadful situation. The patient is having an incurable progressive disease. The patient is terminally ill. Uh, patient either does not know or is pretending not to know. The family does not want the patient to know. The patient is suffering, family is suffering. It's quite a messy situation. So in that kind of situation, do not push your efforts to control collusion. It's always a gentle procedure, collusion management. Do not push. It will only make things worse for you. That's why.
Yes, sir. One more question is there. What if the patient is serious? Can we disclose bad news?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when should bad news be communicated? When it is beneficial to the patient, right? If the patient is already bedridden, but but mentally in a position to take it, then even then, uh, it may be a good thing. However, if the patient is also cognitively declined, that means they are not fully there, then in that point of time, there is really no sense of trying to communicate bad news to a patient who may not understand it properly. So the so the earlier it is done, the better. And that is why it is important for, when I tell the doctors, I tell doctors that when you are the treating doctor, from the at the earliest, from the time of diagnosis, try to be honest with your patients and family. Otherwise, at the end, when you have created such a mess that you have not told the patient and the family is trying to collude with you, and by the time they reach us in palliative medicine, we are handed over a total messy situation. And it's such complication, we have to untangle all of these problems. So the treating doctor itself have been, you know, counseling the family and then trying to, and then made an honest effort to be honest with the information with the patient. All of these things could have been sorted out. Of course, making sure that you don't force information on patients who don't want to know, but only to those who want to know. Are there more
And
questions? Yeah.
no, sir. And one comment is there in the chat box. Is Dr.
എനിക്ക് കേൾക്കും എനിക്കൊരു
Hello, sir.
ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ സാർ
Hello, sir. Ajay, sir. Paryu,
great
sir.
session, excellent session, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent. Yes. I am a veterinary doctor, not a medical doctor. As you know, my wife is a lung cancer patient. For the past 3.5 years, she was undergoing treatment. The first diagnosis was uh, small cell adenocarcinoma lung with metastasis, rib, skull, sternum, adrenal gland, etc. in the fourth stage. I rushed to Lakeshore Hospital and met Dr. Gangadharan. He told me that it is incurable. Personally, the patient didn't hear that. For the last 3.5 years, we are doing medication according to uh, their choice. Till now, I didn't tell anything about her about the prognosis of the disease. Will it be? Will it lead to a collusion or something like that? I told she knows better. It is cancer. Disease is cancer, but incurable. I didn't tell. Even now, for the heaven's sake, she is still now. Till she is alive now for the past 3.5 years. Is there any chance for pollution if he knows the prognosis of the disease? What is your opinion?
So right now, there is transparency as far as diagnosis is concerned, but there is collusion as far as prognosis is concerned.
Yes.
So that is what is going on right now. Transparency for diagnosis, the truthful sharing of information has happened, but as far as the prognosis, that information has been withheld from them.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
as I said earlier itself, we can explore whether she wants to know or not, right? Or she may, like during part of any conversation, may come up with why am I not getting better? What is wrong? That could be an opportunity to start exploring. Uh, what if you want to know more? Maybe we can go and talk to the doctor. Why you are not getting better? Something like that. So we can use an opportunity which comes up in a casual conversation to explore whether she wants to know more or not. And during this time, if she kind of indicates that she wants to know more, then we would be giving a warning shot. However, while you are exploring whether the person wants to know or not, if after some time the person starts talking about other things and does not focus on the subject, like every day, if the focus is not really on the subject or other things, perhaps the person is not really focusing on that issue, then we don't have to pursue it. I don't know whether it is clear. I hope you're unmuted. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
She is happy now. No physical problems. No other problems. No loss weight. Body loss weight. No loss weight. Etc. Everything is normal now. Now, in the present, we are under the treatment of Dr. Rajita at Kim's Hospital. You may know that. You will know Dr. Rajita. She is okay now, but this pollution is still there.
If she is physically and mentally okay, maybe this is kind of a good time to talk
Okay,
about
sir.
it. If she wants to talk about it,
Okay, sir. Okay,
not
thank you,
because
sir.
you heard the class and you think it's a good idea. It only we will proceed only if the concerned person wants to know more about it.
Okay, okay,
And
sir.
if you give
Thank you, sir.
one shot, for example, in Malayalam, I would say, കേൾക്കാൻ ഇത്ര സുഖമില്ലാത്ത കാര്യമാണെങ്കിലും കേൾക്കണം എന്നുണ്ടോ? If it is something serious, would you still want to know? Then it gives a chance for the person to think about it and either go ahead with it or not proceed with it.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
So I'm not asking you to proceed with it because I'm not the treating doctor, so I don't know the background of the medical condition. I think for every patient, we have to, as I said, there has to be, you have to have a clarity about what is going on. Since I don't have a clarity, I am not saying you proceed with it. I'm saying this is how we would generally go about
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
it. Thank you, sir. Nice meeting you again.
Thank you, sir. It's time to move on to the case presentation. I would like to invite the case presenter of the day, Ms. Srigala Naya, who is one of our active participants. And by profession, she is a psychologist and counselor at Medanta, the Medicity, Gurgaon. So, Srigala ma'am, are you ready?
Gayatri, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect.
Okay. Give me a second.
Yeah, sure, ma'am.
Everyone, Dr. Raghavan and Dr. So this is about the patient. We are calling her by the name Miss Y, and she's 37 years old, and he's diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, and her occupation is a software engineer. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
So she has been diagnosed with metastatic adenocarcinoma in the year 2016 at the age of 32. Primary origin at that time was from liver. She had completed almost 1 year treatment at Medanta Oncology Department where I work. The treatment included chemotherapy followed by surgery and radiation. And she was disease free for almost 10 months and again presented with multiple complications. And this time it was recurrence in the ovaries. So again, she underwent surgery, then chemos, and within a span of 1 year, the third recurrence this time, primarily from pancreaticobiliary cholangiocarcinoma was the diagnosis. So again, multiple endoscopies, prior chemos, and currently undergoing chemotherapy. So when we come to insight about the diagnosis, she was aware of her disease and treatment plans too. However, wanted to fight it out for her son. And the family was also aware of it. And prognosis, she was aware of the poor prognosis and the consequences attached with the treatment, still wanted to go ahead. Family was aware of the poor prognosis and decided to stand by her decision at any cost. About the palliative care, patient and family both were aware. So she comes from a family, the mother and father used to come along with her. And I've been told by the patient herself that she lost her husband when her child was born. And she's staying with her parents right now. And she has a brother who is married.
Family overview
Yeah,
itself.
I'm audible. Am I audible now?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please go on, ma'am.
Okay. So when we come to insight about the diagnosis, she was aware of the disease and treatment plans too. However, wanted to fight it out for her son. And family was also aware of the diagnosis. Prognosis, she was aware of the poor prognosis and the family was also aware of the prognosis. And the patient wanted to go ahead with the treatment and family was ready to support her, by all means. And palliative care, both were aware, the patient and the family, both were aware. So when it comes to her family, the mother and father used to come along with her. So father was a 67 years journalist and mother was a beautician. She runs a beauty parlor. She was around 65 years. So this girl, this patient was married and she lost her husband after 2 years of marriage. So she was staying with her parents only in Ghaziabad, near Delhi. It comes under UP. And she has one more brother who is elder to her, 39 years old, married, and he has his son. So they all were staying in one family. So she was, they were basically from Patna, Bihar, and now settled in Ghaziabad. So this, she was married at the age of 28, and her son was born after 2 years of marriage. Her husband died of heart attack when the son was only 2 months old. She was about to get married when after 2 years after his death, and that was the time she was diagnosed with cancer for the first time. Though the person whom she was getting married was ready to wait, for the treatment to happen, but she somehow decided to step back on her own. And then she had to leave her job. As I said, she was a software engineer with She Dot. So she had to leave her job because of the treatment schedules and started living with her parents and brother and family. Now her son is 7 years old and her treatment is still going on. So she belongs to a middle class family, and she's very close to her son. And when it comes to parents, she's close to her mother, not to, not that much to the father, but she's more close to the mother. And then interaction with husband's family is kind of, mediocre. And friends and colleagues sometimes do call, so there is not much interaction with them. And extended family, there is not much interaction. So she after the first course of treatment, she decided to go to satsang and VK Shivani, and then she's a regular, she's regularly following up yoga, meditation, etc. So, like I said, father is a journalist and mother runs a beauty parlor. So after she left her job, she used to help the mother in the parlor with making promotional stuff, etc. for her. So, brother and sister-in-law works for MNCs. Extended family or husband's family did not support her financially, and they never had any medical insurance whatsoever. So all the treatment cost was, they were paying from their pocket only. So it was a huge sum. Somehow, I think they were managing it. So when I recall, I first met her in 2016, and she was totally devastated at that point of time. So tragedy, one after the other, had made her aggressive and full of resentment for one and all. She was rude with her parents. The parents also told me this, and I myself have witnessed to this. She was anxious, depressed, was my conclusion at that point of time. And when it comes to total pain, she used to have this acute nausea and vomiting problem after the chemos. So for a week or so, she was like bedridden, and excessive tiredness, body pain, and loss of appetite and weight loss was also drastic. Psychologically, she had depression, I felt she has anxiety, stress, anger, and then uncertainty were there. Social, economic, financial challenges, as there is no medical insurance and there was no support from the extended family. So spiritual, it was hopelessness. And I mean, this question always used to come back to her, like, why me? Because I mean, this is not a classical case. It's one after another, three recurrences and loss of husband. I mean, too many tragedies. So, I mean, counseling, she used to come for counseling regularly, and she used to make herself busy with promotional activities for some organizations also, other than for her mother's beauty parlor. And physical aspect, she's dependent on painkillers and sleeping pills. So discussion points I wanted to mention is like, she was initially not at all happy with the primary consultant, and the complaint was the way he managed to tell her the bad news was, I mean, she couldn't digest it. She said, there would have been a better way to express it or convey it to me. So, what would have been the best possible way of breaking the bad news to her, and how to deal with her son, and then some takeaway points for her parents, and if any suggestions or advice for her brother and family, and what's the role of a support group, to help her out. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sri Gala ma'am. It was very clear. So the
Thank
discussion
you.
points. So the discussion points. Now the participants have to reply for that. So now the
Okay.
floor is open for all. Kindly put your suggestions in the chat box, or else you can unmute and speak. Biju sir, do you want to add anything to this?
Uh, thank you, Srikla Madam, for the excellent presentation.
Thank
Very
you.
clear, crisp. Uh, I just want to know how much does the patient know actually? You have mentioned that she probably knew about her diagnosis, but did she know how serious it was? Did she have a clarity on that?
Yes, yes, sir. She has. She has.
Okay, so she knows her diagnosis and she knows the prognosis, right?
Yes, she knows. She knows.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
so probably that part is already taken care of. That was the first question.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, she was of the opinion that, the doctor should not have told her is what she felt. This was too much of a, like, heartbreaking information for her.
So probably how it was
Uh,
conveyed may have been a problem because we always teach give information only as much as the patient wants to know. And that is why it is important for everybody to learn the technique of communicating bad news. So she, according to you, she feels that she was told too much, and she does not
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
appreciate that part. Okay. So
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
that?
She was not ready to.
Yeah. So was that a traumatic experience for her that she still remembers about that?
Yes. Every
Definitely.
time she comes to me, the first thing she tells me is that only.
Right. So that is
Yeah.
the so for all the people who are listening, that's why it is important to first distinguish between people who want to know and who do not want to know, and only proceed with people who wants to know. And even among them, there may be people who may want to know different quantities of information. Some may want to know 100%, some may want to know 50%, some may want to know 75%. So you have to give information only as much as they want to know. And that is why it is very important that we do it in the proper manner. Otherwise, it will be a trauma for them which does not heal. I was just wondering the second part, how to deal with a son. Can you elaborate on
Um, she is that, the husband couldn't even see the baby because she was with her parents in Ghaziabad for the delivery, and the husband was in Bangalore. Both husband and wife were working in Bangalore at that point of time. So he was about to fly to Delhi to see the son, and one day before, he died all of a sudden. So this boy never met his father only. So he's a very quiet child. So I've met him a couple of times, and he doesn't mingle with other kids. And there is this cousin of him there at his house. I mean, her brother's son is also there. So he always bullies him, but he never reacts. Very submissive child. So the teachers, I think he's in class 1 right now. Teachers also tells her, like, he's a very quiet child. He doesn't interact much. He doesn't open up much. So that's also a problem area for her. I mean, she's worried about that part too.
you are a professional counselor, so I'll be
Yes,
I'm
sir.
just a palliative care doctor, so I'm sure I will leave. I would want to be I would want to be educated from counselors who are psychologists or probably who deal with child psychology. What possibly could be the reason for the way the child is like that? Madam, if you could, I'm just asking you to answer to the question that you put up, or if anybody else in the audience would want to chip in.
Um,
Madam, you first.
I really don't know, sir, because I mean, there is too much emotions involved here. You know, if, the grandparents are also old. Mother is, till the time he's at the age of 2, he's seen her going to the doctor, coming back, and not keeping well for many days. So, I mean, what is going through his mind is, I don't know. He's too small to explain all those things. But then it's important for anyone for that matter to, talk to him and try to find out what is he feeling, etc. So maybe a child psychologist will be able to bring something out of him.
Oh, thank you. I am seeing in the
I
chat.
really have no. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat, Madam Sindhu Ishwaran is coming up with points. Madam, would you want to, talk to us and share your views on that?
Yes. Hello. Hello. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, we'll be interested to know your points on this.
No, I just felt since a child is so small, maybe 8, 9 years, the formative years, just hearing the story of the mother going through such a traumatic experience. And I just know how maybe in our culture, we sort of voice it in a very strong way without realizing how it affects children. Like maybe with big family gatherings, there might be times when say, oh, this child never met his father. Oh my God, this. So this sort of builds such a heaviness in, I feel this is one of the reasons he could be very quiet. And growing up in a family home, I don't know if they're how, because always there is, even for the mother, it might be that I'm dependent on my parents, I'm dependent on my brother. And, she could maybe put that on the child. And so a child feels very difficult, like to express, or even feels, oh, I can receive play and love without, he could just feel unwanted. I'm just saying different ideas. It could be nothing of this. The family might be very, very loving. I'm just giving the thoughts that came up. But yeah, that's it, I guess.
That was very helpful. That was very helpful.
Miss Gayatri, may I come in here? This is Mudre from Mysore.
Biju sir, do you have?
No, absolutely. I was just before Mudra sir comes in, I just want to know whether Madam Ishwaran is dealing with child psychology. I mean, what would be her background? Because the views were very insightful.
Yes, thank you, sir. Mudre sir, you can proceed.
Oh, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Yes, you are, sir.
Yeah. Probably with one or two cases of this kind of experience. I'm not really sure if a motherly attitude towards the child, if we are able to focus on this. Now, if the mother focus on the child's benefit and how it has to be shaped further when she is not there, if that thought process is put in the mother's mind, things probably may change. Now, how I'm going to protect my child when I'm not there? And what are the resources I need to have? Should I seek help of my extended family to see that my child is well protected? And can I talk to my parents to see that they keep themselves as fit as possible to see that this child reaches certain level of age and competence? Probably this has to be worked out, focusing on the child's benefit. And there has to be great teamwork to see, because the father is not there, mother is probably she's on the way of exit, we are not aware. Then a 7-year-old child, how he is going to manage himself without any support? When we start looking at building the support for the child, we can build a team. This is what I feel. This is one of my experiences in Mysore when we were talking about one particular patient who was around 32, 33 years and final stages of cancer. Then the ladies immediately agreed when we spoke about focusing on the child's improvement. Lady immediately agreed, started taking medicines like immediately morphine and other things, bringing down the pain. Then she started teaching the child how to take care of themselves when she is not there. That was the change we could see. Probably this is where we need to see that where the attention has to be given and build the team around that attention spot. This is my view, sir. Thank you very much.
That was very, very helpful, sir. Thank you so much. That was quite a huge contribution to today's discussion.
Any more comments, participants?
I guess if participants could focus on the other part, any suggestions for the parents and any suggestion for the brother and the family, and then maybe we can wind this up. I think Mudra sir has already touched a little on that part also. How do we create the team who will take care of the child? So I guess we just, in case somebody else has anything else to contribute to what Mudra sir has already mentioned, I guess that's about it. He has kind of laid it out very beautifully.
Probably, Mudra again here, probably if some success stories like old parents having lost their daughter, leaving the grandchild in their care, and people who are taking care of grandchild at the age of 70, 75, 80, taking care of their health and being fit, a purpose is newly created for them in their elderly life. If these sort of stories can be brought up, it will be very beneficial, because once it is a parental decision which brings the child into this world. Now that's a huge responsibility. To carry out that responsibility, we need to see that we keep ourselves empowered always, physically, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. This is what palliative care talks about. If any couple of them are not there, it is very difficult to manage. On the other side of it, if you are fit enough to give, to provide your contribute when you are fit enough, that's the life's purpose is served. How long we can take it forward is the nature's decision, but can we not plan for that? We can keep working to keep ourselves fit, to see that we are financially fit, always to provide somebody who needs it. We can always see that we are emotionally fit to provide that support, one who is not emotionally so fit. Conversely, all the concepts of palliative care, like physical care, your emotional care, financial care, or your social care and this, spiritual care. On the other side, it is the fitness what we need to imbibe in ourselves till we are alive and contribute that to the people who require. That's how this has to be looked into. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the valid points. And yes, regarding the support groups, if she can be connected to any of the support groups, like just like peer group or something else like that, it would be very beneficial for her mental health also, if her physical condition permits that. Like in Kerala, Kudumbasrees and all plays a vital role in this, where it is not for some kind of diseases or anything else like that. Still, people, ladies, it is just a model of women empowerment, and where ladies plays a very vital role in that, as they stood for each other, some kind of financial assistance, some vocational rehabs, etc. are engaging, or etc. are um, some kind of initiatives are putting forward by the Kudumbasrees in Kerala. So if we can link this patient or link this lady to any of the support groups, like people with uh, cancer, who are more like who has overcome a lot of troubles. So if we are linking her to such groups, it would be more beneficial for her mental health, and she'll be more happy. So support groups also play a very major role. And yes, participants, you can definitely put your comments. Yes, pause. Introducing art and any play forms. Oh yeah, it's for the child. Introducing art and any play forms can also be helpful for the child to overcome the situation.
A lot of very, very helpful practical tips coming from Madam Sindhu Ishwaran.
I guess no more comments. And thank you so much, participants, for your active interaction. And I would definitely thank Dr. Biju Raghavan for this wonderful session again. So thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And
it's my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to be part of Pallium India's program. And thank you all the participants for being so active and interactive. I definitely learned a few things today, and I'm very thankful to all of you for your contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Thank you, sir.
thank you, sir.